Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from ejsllc.com. This video is another in my Red Hat Certified System Administrator exam practice sessions where I'm not necessarily giving authoritative information, but I'm talking about the objectives to see if I feel comfortable with them, also trying to demonstrate a couple of things with it, and really just assess if I'm ready to handle these objectives on the exam. Usually by the end of these videos I have a pretty good idea if I'm confident about the objective or if I need to go back and spend a little bit more time on it before I take my exam. Before I dive in, I want to remind you, if you enjoy the content of these videos, make sure you click like, also subscribe to the channel and ring the bell when you do so you can be aware of when new content comes available. So this video is not going to be too terribly long, and if you've watched any of my others, it's almost a running joke at this point. I tend to find a way to talk for a while about these objectives, but the one for today is under the Managed Security section of the RHCSA objectives, and it is configure key-based authentication for SSH. And I'm going to show you two ways of doing it. One's the easy way, and quite frankly the way that I will probably always use. The other is the little more difficult way, and then I will show you how you can still have a password for your key-based authentication but not always have to put it in per session. So starting off, what this is talking about is typically when we do an SSH connection into something, we have to feed it a credential. So for example, if I were to, let me get the IP address of my other virtual machine. That's not going to be on screen here because I'm only sharing the one VM. Let me look that up real quick. Thank you for your patience with me. I think it's going to be .116 if it's usually what it gets. Yep. So if I were to SSH Eddie at hostname 116, you can also do -L and put the login information, but I tend to use user at whatever. It's first going to say that, hey, we can't trust this machine, mainly because this particular fingerprint for this machine hasn't been used yet, and your system is going to prompt you if you're sure that you want to continue. Now, if you are not sure about the connection, then obviously no for that. So yes, and it's going to add it to a list of known hosts. And if you ever want to see this list, it lives in your hidden SSH folder. So if I were to cat, oh wait, it's asking for my password. Let me go and feed it that. And now I'm in CentOS Practice 1 rather than Practice 1 GUI. So that's your basic password authentication. When I was saying before, let me cat home SSH known hosts. And so it's just a one-to-one relationship of IP address, what type of encryption it uses, and that fingerprint. And if you do this several times, you'll see a variety of names that are going to be in your known host. So our password authentication. The problem with password authentication is A, it requires you remembering a password, and B, it can eventually be cracked. I mean, you could probably have some 30-character random string of stuff, and that would be more difficult to crack, but you know, it's a potential vulnerability. Key-based authentication is a bit more secure in the fact that only if you have this public-private key match is a connection going to be allowed. Now, could that be spoofed? Sure. I mean, someone could steal the key and put that on other systems and such, but that would, when you start looking at risk and what are the odds of something happening, that's pretty low. Like this, the key-based authentication, you will eventually, if you set your server to only accept key-based authentication, then if an SSH connection tries to happen without it, that connection is going to be dropped even before there would be a chance to compromise a password. So anyway, to be able to get our key-based authentication, we need to generate an RSA key, SSH key. So let me clear this. And the command we're going to do for that, which is really a script that we're calling, but it is SSH keygen. Now, you can You can feed this some parameters if you want. I tend to step through the wizard on this, so we'll do that. It's going to generate a key pair, ask us where we want to save it, and ask us if we want a particular passphrase. For this, I'm not doing that. We'll do an example a little bit later where there is a passphrase. The idea of the passphrase, hey, we're trying to get rid of passwords. Yeah, but at the same time, this is an extra layer of protection for your SSH key. And I'm keeping that empty. And it has said that its public key has been saved in ID RSA pub. And if we take a look at these, let me cat. So that's our private key. This you are not going to be sharing. It stays on your system. And if I were to do .pub, this is our public key. And the public key is what we're going to put on whatever endpoint that we have. And the way that SSH authentication works, and this is oversimplified. You know, if you're an crypto and SSH expert out there, please forgive me for the oversimplification. Or if you want to leave a comment detailing exactly how this process works, by all means. I'm sure both I would be interested, and I'm sure anyone else watching the video would be as well. But basically what's going to happen is your SSH server is going to be looking at the public key that's on it, comparing it to what you have for your private key, and if things match, not literally match character for character, but if the mechanism ends in a success, then you'll be authenticated. So to copy our public key over to whatever SSH server we have, we're going to use SSH copy ID and then username at the host. And it gives you a little bit of information about that. Feed it our password. And it says number of keys added 1, and then you should try logging to the machine just doing SSH and the information. You're not going to pass a password because you're going to be sending a key instead. So let's do this real quick. Let me cat id.pub, and I'm going to copy this to a text file. There's a method to the madness here. All right, so now let's SSH into notice we're in now without having to do a password. And if I were to go into the hidden folder SSH here, we have authorized keys. And if I were to cat that authorized key, then we see the same public key that is in this text file here. And so part of the authentication mechanism is matching, hey, do these keys match? If so, let this person in, right? So that's the easy way of getting the key there. Let me go back out. And I'm going to create another user. We're going to call this sudo user add test user 1. All right, and if you did that password there, of course I fat fingered it. There we go. And we're going to set its password. And this will be good old monkey123. All right, so I'm going to SU into that test user 1. So now here's test user 1, and I'm going to generate my SSH key. I'm going to click through the, all right, so we have the SSH key and we made ID RSA.pub. So the difficult way of doing this is literally copying that key to that authorized keys file on the remote server. So let's say that Honestly, I can't really think of a good scenario off the top of my head where you wouldn't just use SSH copy ID, but just kind of proof positive that this would work. Let us cat SSH ID RSA .pub. So copy that, exit out of here. Let's SSH back into, not my router, but back into my VM. Let's VI. Actually, we need to make the user account here. So let's do user add, because this is going to, I'm not sure if you can do like global keys or anything like that. I'm pretty sure this is per user. So we'll sudo user add test user 1. And all right, so we've done that. I want to see, is this owned by the user? That's also owned by the user. Okay, so I'm going to sudo, and notice this is pretty cumbersome what I'm doing, but it's more of a kind of proof of this is how it works. So we'll sudo, let's go to home test user 1. All right, we're going to make dir, and we are going to vi and paste this key in here. Now I need to change the ownership of this. Shown R, this will be test user 1, test user 1 for SSH. I like doing RV because I like getting that output. What? Oh. Invalid group test you. Well, maybe if I spell correctly, that'll help. All right, we got that. And just to check here. Looking how ownership is. So that's read, write, execute, and then just read, write for the authorized keys. So what we need to do is change mode to 700 for SSH, and change mode to see read write is going to be 600 to SSH authorized keys. All right, oh, well, I wanted ALR because I wanted to do this recursively. All right, so that looks the same. Okay, so we got that there. Now, so after all that work, let's exit. And I'm curious to see if this will actually work without a password, like the account not having a password. So let's see what happens. So we'll SU, I'm back on my, now I'm back on my original machine. Let's SU into test user 1. Wait, nope, that's not that password. This is monkey123. And let's try to SSH. All right, it's going to ask about the fingerprint. I expected that. And we're in without having to do a password. So all of that work that we just did, minus the initial creation of the user on the remote system, is achieved through SSH copy ID. So it's one of these, I mean, yeah, you can do it manually. I'm sure there's probably some scenario out there as to why you need to do it manually, but I have yet to come across it. SSH copy ID is the way to go for that. So the other thing I wanted to show, so let me exit out of this because I know test user 1's not an administrator, and no, not 122.1, 116. There we go, and I'm going to go and sudo into root. Is configuring this to where you're hardening your system a bit. So yeah, you want to use SSH, but you want to restrict who's able to access. We're going to try to protect against dictionary attacks for passwords and such. So what we're going to do is head into the etc directory, actually etc SSH, and we have the sshd config file. So if I were to vi into that, there are a couple of things I want to bring your attention to, and the first is permit root login. As a hardening measure, I typically will turn this from yes to no. And the reason doing that is if I'm in a system and I am needing to do stuff as root, I am probably going to log in as my non-root administrator account and then sudo -i into root. Rarely am I going to just contact via root itself, unless I'm at the console. And so therefore, this is something I typically will turn to no, because this isn't preventing root from logging into your system. This is preventing root from logging in initially via SSH. The other thing I wanted to show is about the password authentication. And notice we have password authentication, yes. We're going to change this to no. Now, be careful before you do this and then restart the SSHD service that you have configured a user that can do key-based authentication, because otherwise you cannot complete an SSH connection, because if you remember that first step of copying the public key from your machine to your remote machine, that requires that password authentication unless you go through all these other steps to get that authorized key there. So if I were to save that and then restart, to hear the ding of my watch, restart SSHD, and while we're here, let's make another user. So user add test user 2, and we'll set the password test user 2 monkey123 monkey123. All right, so we'll exit out of here, and so now we're back. There we go. Now we're back on the actual system, and let's try to SSH as test user 3. Test user 3. No, test user 2 rather. At 192.168. 122.116, and it's going to, you don't even get a chance to feed it a password. It's going to drop that because SSH is saying, hey, we're only doing, we're not that we're only doing key authentication. I think there are some other things it might accept. I'd have to double check that SSH-config, but we are definitely not accepting password authentication. Now, in this scenario, let's say you've already locked down the server, we could, generate the key and then manually add it if we wanted to be able to add test user 2 without allowing password authentication. Perhaps that's one of those scenarios where you wouldn't be using SSH copy ID. So let's see. I thought there was one other thing I wanted to do server side with SSH on this video, but it's not coming to me. So we've copied the key, we've set it to where it only accepts key-based authentication. Yeah, I guess that's it. Okay, so the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to go back and allow password authentication one more time, because we're going to make another test user so I can demonstrate the SSH agent, which is allows you to have password protect your SSH key, but still allow passwordless authentication. So we're going to SSH back in, not 166, 116. And I'm just going to go sudo vi etc ssh sshd.config, search for password, and we're going to allow password authentication one more time. Alright, let's go back to our original server. We're going to make another user, test user 3. I should have went ahead and done that on the, so a little thing you can do over SSH, you can run some commands. And I think I can do this. I don't know, let's try it. So SSH eddy at the host. The command I want to run is sudo user add test user 3. Yeah, I figured that's not going to work over SSH, so let me do another SSH session back in. Make our third test user. And let's set its password. To good old monkey123. Alright. Exit that. And so we're back to here. So now we have our test user 3. And let me su into test user 3. I guess we haven't made it, oh yeah, I haven't made it client side yet. So sudo user add, to practice all these other skills at the same time, right? Alright, and then we're going to set its password. Alright, so now, not sudo, just su to test user 3, monkey123. Alright, so now we're going to make our SSH key, so sshkeygen. And this time I am going to give it a passphrase, and I'm just going to give it a passphrase of literally the word password. Alright, and so let's do ssh copy ID. Test user 3 at my host. Oh, copy dash ID. Sorry about that. There we go. Accept the fingerprints. Give it its password. Oh, doing capital M for monkey, trying to make my little password safer. Permission denied. I thought that's what we set it to. There we go. Alright, so I've copied the key. Now before, with my just Eddy account, I did not have any type of password saved on the saved for the key itself. So once I had copied the key over and I start the session with SSH, it just works. But now here, since I'm as test user 3, if I were to SSH test user 3 at it's going to ask me for my password, because when we created the key, we set a password for that for the private key. So if I were to feed that the password, then I'm in. All right. So the question becomes, can that's just going to get annoying having to do that over and over again. So we'd like to have passwordless authentication, but still have that protected by a password. And so what you can do is use the SSH agent. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of the nuts and bolts of exactly how this is working, because quite frankly, I don't know it off the top of my head. If you're, again, expert in SSH, by all means, leave a comment explaining it, but I'm going to show you basically how to use it. So we're here as test user 3. We're going to do SSH agent bash. And so that has SSH agent running in the background. If I were to do ps aux grep SSH, we see the SSH agent is running. And so once we have SSH agent, we can do SSH add. And what this is going to do, and again, I'm probably explaining this wrong, but essentially we are storing the password for this particular shell session for our private key for SSH. All right. And so what this allows us to do then is now SSH test user 3 at 192.168.122.116, and we're in. So we exit this, we can do it again, and we're still in. But when this shell session ends, that stored password's going to go away. And so when we make a new shell session, we'll still have to enter the password. So this gives you the protection of that private key is not just floating around there without any password, but at the same time, while you are logged in as this user and you have explicitly used SSH agent and SSH add to store your password, makes life a little bit easier for doing your SSH sessions key-based without passwords. So one thing I did want to do is, let's clear the screen. Let's cat SSH ID RSA. That's, it might not show that right now like this. So let me exit that. Let me exit this. Sudo I. Because what I'm curious about, let's try this again. So this will be home test user 3 SSH ID Oh, I'm doing SSH. Well, why is that tab completion not working? So home test user 3 SSH ID RSA. Okay, so it's not encrypted. Or it might be. I doubt it. Let's compare this to Eddie. Nope. For some reason I was expecting that to have like begin and end encrypted private key, but perhaps not. Well, then that might not be a layer of protection for it. Or there may be something written in this key that says, hey, you have to use a password, which that's much more likely. Anyway, I may be completely misinterpreting that. Again, if I am, feel free to put that in the comment. So I've done it again. I intended for, when I first thought of doing this video, I'm thinking, hey, I'll just show how to generate the keys and copy SSH. But one of the goals for these cert exams, this is something that when people ask me if they should do cert exams and such, I usually tell them yes, but do it for the right reason. Your goal for doing these is to learn the skills. And then once you learn the skills at the end, if you earn the cert, that's kind of your added bonus. But really what you're chasing and what you're trying to get are the skills. And so I figured, with your own study for RHCSA or whatever for this SSH, yeah, you can configure this all day, but I think it helps to understand like what's actually going on and the mechanisms behind it, which is why for my practice sessions I'm often doing little things like this, seeing what keys look like, seeing how you can, we can configure SSH keys all day, but how would we make a system be in such a state where it's only going to accept the SSH keys? So you do things like that to kind of go beyond just the words of the objective and actually learn something about the topic. Well, I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like on the video, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell when you do, and don't hesitate to leave comments. Feel free to ask a question. I'll answer it to the best of my ability as I have time, and if I've got something wrong and I know that there's some SSH stuff that I oversimplified, feel free to leave a comment correcting me. I'm all about I'm all about trying to get the information right. I don't pretend that I know everything, and really it's through helping one another that we actually learn and get some good information. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.